I'm Marshall Long. I'm the property owner here along with my brother Mark Long. We're doing some prescription burning today on the ranch. It's something that we've been doing on the Mariposa Ranch since 1953. My father helped start the Mariposa Range Improvement Association. That first year in '53 they burned about 28,000 acres the first year. And we've continued that for all these many years. We do have a problem on the ranch with invasive species, and that's what we're really working on today with this prescription burn. It's called Medusa Head.
We're out here doing a prescribed burn. Primary purpose is for training. Secondary is to take out noxious weeds. We have a large population of Medusa Head that we're trying to burn off. And yeah, it's going pretty well so far. Doing 4 plots today, and we're already halfway done. We came out the day before doing a cover, step point cover, just measuring what's on the ground, and measuring about 100 points or so per plot. That way we know what's there before, and then when the next year and the year after that, when we come back to burn again, we know that we're actually changing the landscape and reducing that invasive weed and promoting more annual grasses to come in. That's better feed for cattle and better for the environment overall. Clearing understories and just all that dead buildup that just knocks off any future growth. So we come out here beforehand, we make sure we get all our paperwork in order, and we do a big search for any endangered species or sensitive species. We also do cultural resources, making sure the air quality is good before we go, and so lots of pre-work goes into this. That's not just all fire. So after a fire, we make sure it's out completely, double checking all the fire spots, the hot spots. And then next year when it starts to green up, we'll be back out doing more step point surveys to check for ground cover and see what's growing back. And hopefully we'll start seeing a trend that Medusa Head is going down and more annual and native grasses are popping back up.
So on this fire today, my assignment is fire behavior analyst, and a bunch of that is nerd work up front, doing a smoke management plan, preparing a prescription that will meet our objectives when applied to the ground. So what we want, as I mentioned, for control or for reduction of the Medusa Head, is we want a fire that has tall enough flame lengths that it's cooking the seeds up on the heads on the top of the stalks, but also has enough residence time that as the stalk of the seed burns off and it falls to the ground, the forest floor, the meadow floor here, that the seed is completely consumed or at least charred all the way through. So what we don't want is a fire that goes through quickly and the seeds just stay up there and don't get heat treated. And we also don't want the fire that goes through so slowly that the flame front is passed when the stalk breaks, the seed falls behind the flaming front. Burning the Medusa Head, since it's an annual grass, it reduces the seed supply. So right now, like I mentioned earlier, the seed is still up on the head, and so if we can get consumption of that seed supply that's up above the ground, which with the flame lengths and the residence times we've been seeing today, we've been very effective so far. Another factor with the Medusa Head is that it concentrates silica in the stems, and then it forms a thatch that the other annual grasses and even the perennial native grasses have a hard time growing up through, and then the cattle don't like browsing through that. It's like chewing sand with all that silica on the stems. So besides reducing the seed of this annual plant, we're also reducing that thatch. So the more beneficial, the grasses, the forbs and the grasses that the ranchers like their cows to eat are easier to eat for them. There's more of them and easier to get to. Range studies have found that because the Medusa Head ripens later, that you can allow most of the annual grasses to ripen go to seed, disperse their seed where it's down in the ground protected from the fire, but the seed on the Medusa head is still up in the head. And so we can burn last year's growth. The seeds are protected down on the soil, but the Medusa head seeds are still up on the stalk where they're vulnerable to the fire. So just some general range management. We were talking about grazing pressure, and integrated pest management, of course, would say instead of using just one method, let's use all our methods that are in our toolbox, every tool that we have to try and reduce the Medusa head. So for the ranchers on a thin margin out here, there isn't enough value to using very expensive herbicides, which are effective to reduce the Medusa head. But if we can knock it down with the fire, then spot treatments are a lot more achievable. And of course, the other tool that we use for integrated pest management on the Medusa head is grazing. So when we've reduced that thatch, when we've reduced the density, when we've increased the other grasses that are coming in, then the cows are much more willing to consume some of the Medusa head while they're eating their, call them ice cream species, the species they favor. Whether that is some of the high protein species like filaree that the range managers like, or the other grasses that are out here. And then we were talking off camera about increasers and decreasers. So increasers are species that the harder you graze it, the more cover you get of those species, and typically they're not going to be your desirable ones, because if they were desirable, cows would be eating them. And then decreasers are typically those species that the cows really like, and the more you graze them, the less of that you have. So your range manager is going to be looking at their stubble height, their cover, and then the trends on the increasers and the decreasers. So our prescription has to do with not only describing the fuels that are going to burn, but also the weather conditions that are going to be present at the time that we ignite. And so part of that is watching the weather. We've been burning down in Madera County earlier this week, and so today was really the day that was available with the crews to come out. We had been kind of nervous because there was a 20% chance of showers today. Maybe it was going to be too moist. If you're able to see the difference between filming this morning, we've had some high cloud cover move in. We were concerned about the humidity being too high, that we wouldn't get the fire movement and the consumption that we needed. But we're getting good flame lengths and residence times here, and that it just confirms that the prescription we prescribed for this is going to be effective for us. And if we came out here, we tried igniting with that prescription, found that it was burning too cool or too hot, then next burn we'd try and adjust that prescription to be more appropriate to get us more likely to meet our objectives. So as we talked about earlier, this is a training burn, and so someone might think, well, why are they putting the fire out? But that's part of the training today, is fire suppression. They get to do this in a training situation where there isn't the heat of war going on and unclear directions. They get to ask questions. Okay, what's our tactic? And if there's any questions about how that tactic rolls out, pause for a minute. Hey, Cap, what are we doing here? And that's opportunity you don't get on an active fire. So here our crews have ignited just a small portion of one of our units, and then while the flames are still small and not too wide of a fire line, get to go in there and suppress it. So training going on behind us. The other part of the training we talked about was the ignition. So the different lighting patterns and different firing devices. So again, our big priority here today is this is a training burn, but we're doing it here because we're trying to reduce the cover of Medusa head, that invasive grass. And so this is, well, I'll just say this is the enemy. This is the Medusa head with the seeds still up in the head. And then going through, doing a light survey of the burned area here, I've got some with the seed that's probably been heated and likely has been killed. And then this other stuff is obviously just turned to dust now. So that tells me we've got an effective burn.